My name is Taraz Lee. I'm an assistant professor in the cognition and cognitive neuroscience area in the Department of Psychology at the University of Michigan. Choking under pressure and how we fail in these high-pressure situations where we want to do our best. Choking under pressure is defined as situations in which people perform worse than you might otherwise expect, specifically because they want to do really well, and it's a high-pressure situation. I'm a basketball junkie. I love playing basketball, watching basketball. I still play a couple times a week, even though I'm in my 40s now. My body's not happy, but I enjoy it. And I think I was always just curious at what's going on in situations where people are really failing under pressure. I'm sure anybody who's performed in anything has felt that pressure and knows they're not quite at their best. And as I learned more about cognitive psychology and cognitive science and neuroscience, I started to wonder what could be driving this failure in these particular situations where you really want to do your very best.
When you play basketball, do you try and put yourself in a certain mindset to...
I never choke under pressure. So in a lot of experiments looking at choking under pressure, you have participants come into your lab, do some sort of task you're interested in, whether that be golf putting or a math test. And a manipulation that tends to put people under a lot of stress and pressure is you tell them that they're playing for cash bonuses, that they're paired with a partner. Their partner did great. They're only going to get paid out if both of you do well. Now it's your turn, and people have a real hard time with the situation and tend to do a lot worse than you might otherwise expect.
The addition of the partner, I think, is really interesting.
It kills.
There.
Playing for that social pressure of playing for a buddy who's just did great, and now it's all riding on you. People do really poorly in that situation. Typically, there's two different kind of theories of what's going on when people are choking under pressure. One, which you might expect, is that when you're in a high-pressure situation, you get really distracted. So you start focusing on worries about failure, or what people are going to think if you fail, instead of focusing on the task at hand. So there's a whole host of studies showing that something like that happens. If you happen to be an expert in the particular thing that you're doing, so let's say you are a professional golfer and it's a putt on the last day of a tournament or something like that. It also turns out that if you're an expert and you focus on what your body's doing, especially if it's a movement skill, like if you're a musician or an athlete, focusing on what your body is doing when you're an expert has a whole host of problems. You're not good because you're thinking about what your body's doing. So we all know about muscle memory. Turns out there's different parts of the brain that are really important for those expert skills that aren't the kinds of parts of the brain that you have conscious access to. Depending on the skill, obviously, but there's an area of brain called the striatum, which is in the basal ganglia. So different areas of the basal ganglia are very important for these more proceduralized skills. It seems like those areas of the brain that are really helping you perform those high-pressure situations. They learn really slowly, but once you have learned, they're really resilient.
And are there brain areas associated with consciously trying hard to think about your body when you're a novice?
Yeah, it turns out early on in learning, when you really have to focus and pay attention to what you're doing, an area of brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is right behind your forehead. It's very important for things like paying attention, focusing. Those are the areas of brain that seem to be more active when you're just learning a new skill and when you're trying to focus on what you're doing. Sure. My favorite anecdote about choking under pressure comes from basketball. Like I said, I'm a basketball junkie. In the 1995 NBA Finals, the Orlando Magic, which was Shaquille O'Neal's team, I think most people have heard of Shaquille O'Neal, they're playing the Houston Rockets. It was the first game of the finals, of the NBA Finals. The Orlando Magic were winning by 3 with about 10 seconds left. Any points would essentially seal the game. A guard on the Orlando Magic named Nick Anderson, he got fouled with 10 seconds left. When you get fouled in basketball, you get 2 free throws, each worth 1 point. He makes either one of those, they just win the game. He steps up to the line, takes his first shot, misses. Seems to get a little nervous, gets a little tight. Second shot, very short, bounces right off the rim, but miraculously it comes right back into his hands. He has another chance. They foul him again, he gets 2 more free throws. Even one of those free throws ices the game. He's a 70% free throw shooter. He proceeds to miss the next 2 free throws as well. The Rockets get the rebound, they hit a 3-pointer, the game goes to overtime, and the Orlando Magic end up losing that game. And Nick Anderson's always remembered as players choked under pressure. So we don't really know too much about what separates the person that excels under pressure and the person that chokes under pressure. A few things we do know, those people who you think are really clutch and do awesome under pressure, they're not actually doing better. They just don't do as poorly as everybody else does. So everybody kind of does worse in these high pressure situations, but the people who are really good, they suffer less than other folks do. From a lot of the experimental research that we've done, it seems like there may be some things that can predict who is more likely to choke under pressure. Specifically, impulsive individuals I found in my work tend to be the ones that choke under pressure a little bit more than your average individual. There's also some other work suggesting that if you're very loss averse, it's called, if you're very scared of losing rather than being driven by the gains and by winning, those individuals tend to do a little bit worse under pressure as well. I think a common one that especially students think about is just test take anxiety. So test anxiety, math anxiety, things like this. People really want to do well on their exam, but they're really worried about failure, and they tend to do really poorly in that situation.
Are there any tips for how to avoid that?
We don't know a ton about what can protect you against choking under pressure and these kinds of anxious moments. But one thing that does seem to help a little bit is if you externalize what you're thinking. So if you have a journal, or just jot down on a piece of paper what you're actually worried about, that tends to get it out of your mind and lets you better focus on the task at hand. Yeah, why was Pavlov's hair so soft?
Why?
Classical conditioning.